Welcome to Constant Variables, a podcast where we take a non-technical look at mobile app development. I'm Tim Bornholt.
And I'm Rob Bentley. Let's get nerdy.
So what are we talking about today, Rob?
We're going to talk about what a server is.
All right. And not one at Perkins, right?
No.
I know you're fond of talking about that type of server.
For all of you who don't know, I used to work as a server at Perkins, but we're talking about something completely different today.
It'd be foolish to talk about that on a show like this.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're going to talk about computer servers. So very high level. Basically, a server is a computer program, and what it does is it transmits information to clients. So in the mobile app space, a client would be your mobile app, and the server basically sits out in the cloud and it waits for the app to request something of it, and then it returns back that information.
Right. So, right.
I mean, yeah, that's pretty much it. Cut. We're done with the episode. Now, we'll go a little bit further in depth here.
So when you're talking about a server, what exactly does that server do then?
So a server does a lot of things. It really is the brains of the app. At a high level, though, a server stores information in a database. That's number one. Number two is it keeps information synchronized across multiple clients. So this is, what we would call the single source of truth, or one app to rule them all. It's the one place that you can make sure, no matter when you check it or wherever, whatever app you check it with, that all your information is stored in this cloud and on the server, and that's where it is always correct. And it also does a lot of other kind of tasks that you would want centralized in one place. So,
stuff like sending out push notifications, credit card processing. If your app has in-app purchases, it'll verify the receipts of those, just logging in and creating accounts, authentication, that kind of thing.
Right. So there's tasks that you don't necessarily want to trust that your app is going to do that correctly, because if you don't have that single source of truth and you have a server that it's like, these are my computers, I'm handling this. If you have it kind of out in the world and your app is just running it, people might be able to do malicious things with it. So that's what you would want those tasks to be able to be run by your server.
So where are these servers? I've heard of server farms and then, the cloud, but like what actually happens? Like where are the servers?
So back in the early days of the internet, and really that's still how it is now, but really if you wanted to get a app like this up and running, you would need to go out to some sort of store, kind of like a Best Buy for really big nerds, and buy a really big machine, spend tens of thousands of dollars on a machine, and then this machine, you would run the server software on it and put it in a server farm, and you would spend thousands of dollars a month on bandwidth costs and electricity and everything you need to power this and maintain this server. Well, that was then. What we do now, though, is this is what we talk about when we talk about the cloud. What you're really talking about are things like virtual private servers. Now, that is basically those machines I was talking about before that are really big and beefy and cost a lot of money. Companies maintain those for you, and they just give you a portion of it, and you kind of have your own server. Like if you think like virtual reality, it's like virtual server just running off on somebody else's machine. You don't really care about the infrastructure part of it. You really just care about that little the server that gets virtualized there. And this would be things like if you hear about Amazon, AWS, or Azure from Microsoft. We use a service called Linode. DigitalOcean is another one that a lot of people may have heard of. These are services that say you can put your stuff on my computers, and that's how you're going to run your server.
So this helps you if you just want to set it up from your own computer. If you want to build a server, you're actually hosting it on someone else's machine instead of like on Silicon Valley, if you've ever seen that, where they have all the computers and wires in the garage.
Right.
You don't have to do that. You can just sign up for one of these companies and then you have your server space.
Exactly. Instead of spending thousands of dollars per month, it's $5 a month to start to get this up. And the big thing here that has an advantage over that is you can theoretically, quote unquote, infinitely scale to however large you want. It's going to get pretty expensive if you're hosting it on someone else's machines, but you can scale up without actually needing to ever physically touch a computer. You can use your terminal and just do everything from your own machine from the comfort of your own office if you want to build up your own server.
As opposed to getting a spike in traffic and then rushing out to Circuit City.
Yeah, and then rushing over to the server farm and installing it yourself.
Yeah.
So that's really when you talk about where a server exists, it exists in the cloud.
Right. Also with the cloud, you'll hear a lot of terminology, backend and front end. So we're going to explain that also.
Yeah. So when it comes to this type of space, the backend is what most people tend to refer to of things you don't actually see. So you're talking about things like the database, the API, which we'll discuss both of those in a little bit. They also, your mobile apps that you download from the App Store, those are going to have somewhat of a back-end component. So it gets a little confusing, but just generally, back-end is things you don't see and front-end is things you do see.
Which we use terms like UI and UX, that's user interface. That would be the front end. So that's the actual app you're touching on your phone or clicking around on your computer, the web front end.
Exactly. And if you're maintaining your app in the back end, if you're using the admin panel, that's basically the front end of the back end. It gets a little, again, confusing and nuanced, but more or less it's just front end things you do see, back end things you don't see. So we want to talk a couple of terms that you're going to hear. These are the different components that when someone talks about a server or the back end, these are the things that we're talking about in those terms. So let's start with databases. What's a database, Rob?
It's all your data and how it's organized and collected.
Nice.
Simply.
Yeah, there you go. It's a large collection of information that's easily searchable. That's the key is you can have a large collection of information, but to be able to just run a query against it and get back information really fast, that's the whole point of a database. So rudimentarily, like what's the most simple thing you can think of as a database, Rob?
Probably Microsoft Excel.
Exactly. Just even simpler.
Or any spreadsheet. Yeah.
Or even just a piece of paper. Like that,
right.
That technically can be a database, you know? Mm-hmm. But when we're talking about mobile apps, usually at a bare minimum, you're using something called SQLite. And that's something that you would have on the app. So Rob does a lot of iOS development specifically. So if Rob is handling a ton of data and needs to be able to search through it really quickly, putting it in a database that lives in the app and being able to run queries against it is way faster than having just something held in memory or something that it's just a lot easier to use a database rather than just trying to run it as one line of code or whatever.
So yeah, this is what servers do then is maintain these databases.
Right. So on the front end, we would use something called SQLite. Most servers, you're going to use MySQL or Postgres or something like that. And if you're talking about terabytes and petabytes of data, if you have a lot of data, if you're Facebook or something to that scale, you're going to use other things that we're not going to get into on this show. But needless to say, these are the basic things that you're going to need to have to build an app. And this is what the server would host, is that software running that database. So what your server actually does is we use an acronym called CRUD. So that would be create, read, update, destroy. And those four things is exactly what you can do with a database. So you can create new entries into that database. You can read them and fetch them on demand. You can update them. You can delete them. And importantly, you can run queries against them to grab, give me everybody in my database whose first name is Rob. And it will give you a list of here's everybody that's Rob.
All right. So if you're making a profile on a social network, you can create the profile. You can look at someone else's profile. You can update your email address, or you can say, I don't want a profile anymore and delete it.
Exactly. So yeah, that's exactly what a database does, is it enables that interaction. So talked about databases. Let's move on to APIs, which are my favorite thing. It's kind of a nerdy thing to have as your favorite, I suppose.
Yeah, APIs are my favorite.
I love APIs. API, application program interface. So an API is basically a contract between anyone who wants to access the server and then the person who created the server. And this contract is how you would be able to fetch information from the server and get it back.
Right. So if we're using the Facebook or any social network example, your front end would use the API. Say you want to look at someone's profile. You hit the button to say, oh, I want to look at this person. The app then uses the API to request the data for that profile from the server. The server then takes that data, it interprets it, and then it sends back the data the app needs to display through the API. It's kind of like the bridge between the server and the front end.
Exactly. It's a common language so that you're not no one in the client is directly interacting with your database or things that live on the server. It's kind of a middleman that can kind of negotiate all of that for you.
It allows the front ends to do certain things, but not others.
Exactly. So the next component to a backend, and actually our final component that we're going to talk about here today, would be an admin panel. And this is basically how you manage your app, how you take care of any of those little components that you need to take care of when you're managing a mobile app.
Right. That's why we call it the front end to the back end.
Exactly. So the first big and obvious thing that most apps are going to use an admin panel for would be user management. So if you need to add new users, if you need to change their permissions, like you need to add somebody who now is an admin or somebody who's in this group, you use the admin panel to do that. Edit their profile, update their credit card information, reset their password. I can't tell you how many times. It's so funny. Like we have a lot of apps where we'll put the app out. No one will have ever used the app. We'll launch it on day one, and more often than not, at least one person will email and say, I forgot my password. And it's like the service hasn't even been around for 24 hours and you already forgot your password. It's little features like that we build into the admin panel that allow you to manage your app.
So yeah, there's, a lot of things that the admin panel can do, but generally, it's just managing your data and being able to do more than the front end can through the API. You have a special API just to do things you need to do.
It's things you don't want everyone to be able to do.
Yeah.
It's things that are very specific to managing your business. This is where if you're really talking about where the magic happens, this is really where it works. This is really where it happens.
Like if your app has payments involved, you can see all the payments and the transactions. You can refund and void and do things like that you need to do where you wouldn't want a customer having that kind of control.
Right. And another big thing that an admin panel helps out with is content management. So if we didn't have a server, every time that you wanted to change any content in your app, if you have pictures or videos, or like, let's say if Facebook didn't have a server, what Facebook would need to do is they would update the app in the store and put it through app review, and it'd be like once a day, here's the new version of the app with everyone's new what's going on in their lives. That's not how it works. So this is where you can actually, having the admin panel is where you would go in and change the content inside your app.
Also on the server or the admin panels where you would look at analytics and how people are using your app.
Like we said, this is where the magic happens. It's where business is built. So you can use the analytics to track what your users are doing inside the app. You can see the trends over time of this feature that we rolled out. Are people actually using it? Is it worth the investment to continue to build that out, or should we just push it aside? Having those analytics accessible inside the admin panel is crucial to being able to answer those questions.
Right. And when a lot of people come to us, they don't even think about the admin panel at all. It's more, what does the front end look like? That's what everyone focuses on.
Well, yeah, that leads in perfectly to our final thoughts for the day. I think when you're talking about mobile apps, people think that the thing you go into the App Store or the Play Store, you download the app, that's the thing that you're going to consider the app, where as soon as you get into the space, you learn real quickly that the app is the server. That is the app.
Right. I think that's it, right? It's the app.
Yeah, it's where all the brains of the operation happen. It's where you manage your users. It's where you change the content. It's where all the data gets synced up and cleaned and processed and everything. Like that's really where like I have said 3 times now, it's where the magic happens.
It's the most difficult part of the app because if it's not right, it really affects everything.
Yeah. And it's also the most, because it's the hardest to do, that usually means it's the most time intensive to build, and that usually means that's the most expensive part of the app. Like building the front end to an app is pretty straightforward, but the back end is really where the challenges occur, and keeping all that data in sync and all those things we talked about with like sending out push notifications and doing credit card processing and verifying receipts. It's like those are things you don't want to screw up.
Yeah, exactly.
So that in a nutshell is what a server is. If you really want to learn more, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter, and we're happy to talk. I love talking about servers and not the Perkins kind.
Yeah, talk to me about that kind.
Yeah, exactly. Show notes for this episode can be found at constantvariables.co. You can get in touch with us by emailing hello@constantvariables.co. I'm at Tim Bornhold on Twitter. Rob is at Scott Mahonis. Today's episode was edited by the incomparable Jordan Doust. This episode was brought to you by the Jed Mahonis Group, who builds mobile software solutions for the on-demand economy. Learn more at jmg.mn.